In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Today's guest is an accomplished executive with extensive experience in leadership, strategy, and operations experience across various industries. Prior to his current role, he has held key positions, including serving as the CEO of Lumar and general manager at Guild Education. He actively contributes to nonprofits as a board member for the Humane League and Link Unlimited Scholars. His company specializes in building software to unlock the next generation of accelerated computing. The company also recently secured investment from Accenture to enhance capabilities in simplifying large-scale data processing for the enterprise. He is the CEO of Voltron Data. Craig Dunham, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I deeply enjoy doing things like this and having conversations like this, and so I'm honored that you would have me on as a guest.
Very glad to have you, and I know we're going to have a lot to talk about. So really, to kick us off, I'd love for you to share maybe a key moment of change that you led through. And I understand there's a really interesting one at your prior company where your company, Seismic, acquired Vivo Group. So I wanted to hear, first, can you start by sharing with us what this meant for you personally? And then let's talk about that change and what were the dynamics at play and what the areas are that you worked through. But start off with what it meant for you, please.
Yeah, I'm glad you phrased the question in that way. I always like to start with the why, right? And immediately my head goes to this moment or this chapter of my career. And I'd say probably for the first 15 years or so of my career, I never thought I wanted to be a CEO. And over the years, I've reflected a bunch on sort of the earlier days where I didn't think that was something I wanted to do. And I was settled and I was comfortable in a executive leadership position, a number of leadership positions, whether it's leading a region or leading a business group. I spent a lot of time in my career in sort of matrixed reporting structures where I had some direct accountability, a lot of indirect accountabilities. And in those structures, there's just a joint accountability or a joint leadership role. And I was really comfortable with that. I am probably more introverted by nature, and my natural inclination is often to be influential without needing necessarily to be at the forefront or the spotlight or in the limelight, nor caring a whole lot about being in front of folks, whether it's internal or external. And so just, very happy and settled. And I remember about 2 years into my time at Seismic, our CEO is my mentor today. He's a great guy. His guy's name is Doug Winter. And we met for a performance review. And at the time, I was general manager. I was running sales. I was running marketing, customer success. I was really focused on a subset of our customers, financial services. And we were growing really fast and, winning about 70% of our deals. We had incredible product market fit within, asset managers within financial services specifically. Team was doing great. And so towards the end of this performance review, he asked me, what do you want to do long term? Like, what was your ultimate goal? And admittedly, I was caught off guard, which I shouldn't have been, honestly, but I was caught off guard. And I'd been so heads down and focused on growing this business, and I wasn't thinking about what that might do for me or what it might mean for me long term. And so in this moment of panic, I just blurred out, I was like, I want your job. And in my mind, it was, hey, I want to be flattering and I want to make sure he knows that I value him and I want to get to where he is ultimately. But then from that point on, he really went on to set me up and go out of his way to prepare me to be a CEO, whether I knew I wanted it or not. And so about 6 months after that performance review, he asked me to lead the company through its first major acquisition. And at the time, we were a $60 million ARR business. We had become the number one player in the space. Sales enablement is the category. The number two player was a company called Savo, the Savo Group, as you mentioned a moment ago. It was about a $30 million in ARR business. It was an incredibly tense and competitive relationship between the two companies. We were in almost every deal together. And it was a really big deal for us to go out and acquire this company. It gave me the opportunity to learn a bunch of lessons that are part of who I am, that shape a lot of my leadership today. And, for me personally, it just gave me the confidence necessary that, okay, actually I can be a CEO, because I was the de facto CEO for this entity that we had acquired. And it just gave me the confidence that I can go off and do this on a larger scale as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'd love to get into some of the lessons that you learned, but I wanted to first hear if you can talk about the dynamics in the market. You talked about acquiring the number two player. What was going on there, and what transpired.
Yeah. So the Vivo Group had been in market for probably 7 or so years before we did. And I think it's fair to say that, when you're the only player in a relatively new category in space, you don't quite have the pressure of continuing to innovate and, continuing to put out new things that customers want. And I think they probably got a little bit stale, right? Candidly. And we came to market in 2014, 2015 with a competitive product that really hit on some of the concerns and problem space that customers had and was more modern and more innovative. And so it enabled us to really come in and start to steal market share from them, all while the collective two companies really helped to grow and establish the entire category because it didn't really exist before. And so, as you can imagine, that creates an incredibly tense and competitive relationship between these two companies. And at some point, we just surpassed them in terms of customers and ARR and had become the leading space. And all the analysts and, the Gartners and the Forresters and the Serious Decisions of the world who go out and say who are the top players in the space had all pretty much unanimously ranked us as number one. And so for us, getting this acquisition did a couple things. One, it allowed us to acquire an incredibly talented group of people who already know our space and know our category, in addition to accelerating our timeline to get to, our target was, hey, we want to get to 100 million in ARR. And if we can quickly acquire 30 and retain the vast majority of that, then it just, really accelerates our growth timeline by quite a lot.
Yeah.
Lessons. I never came to that. Sorry. Was that your next question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what are the things as you look back on it now? What are the things you think were done right? What are the things, hindsight's always 2020? What would you do differently if you were kind of facing a similar situation next time?
So three things really jump out to me as I thought back on this. One is not to underestimate your competition, and I'll come back to why in just a moment. Number two is the importance of communication. And then when you think you're done communicating, go back and over communicate some more. The third one is people, which feels a little bit cliche, but it is. It's the talent, it's the team that matters more than anything else. And so if I start to dig into each one of those separately, the way that this sort of underestimation of the competition, which I think it's fair that we did, to say that we did that early on in this acquisition, it manifested itself in two ways primarily. One, we somewhat arrogantly assumed that because we were the number one player in the space, because all these analysts said we're the best, that the acquisition would then transition into a massive migration project where all of the existing roughly 30 million in ARR would just leap at the opportunity to move over to our platform. It's cooler, it's better, et cetera. The second thing that happened that really manifested itself about underestimating competition was when the number one player takes out the number two player, what does that mean for the number three player? And well, obviously the number three player now suddenly becomes number two. And that competitor in this situation, that competitor's technology at least, was really good. And suddenly we're in RFPs now where you need to evaluate at least two technologies, and where we had consistently been beating the Sabo group, now suddenly we've got slightly more formidable competition from a product and technology standpoint. And suddenly we probably put a bunch of wind in the sails of that number three player. In the end, it all worked out really well because, again, it was about category growth, and it's the, rising tide raises all ships, as they so commonly say. But those were some of the dynamics we faced. I think those two things, sort of assuming that people would just want to migrate, as well as elevating the number three player to the number two player, I think it all came together as we started approaching each Sabo customer about a migration. And the response from almost every one of those customers was, well, if we're going to move to something, I want to first see what else is out there. And suddenly, the team that we had retained, which are largely customer success people, account managers, because we were expecting to run migration projects. Suddenly we're in 100 competitive sales cycles, operating with a team of customer success people to go out and competitively sell all of these deals. And so even knowing what we know today, we most certainly would have done the acquisition, but we might have thought about the team structure a little bit differently, as well. And, it ended up being an incredibly successful thing, but I think it has a lot to do with, lesson number 2 and lesson number 3 are, which are about the communication and making sure you enable and empower those people.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's so many moving pieces in an integration that like I said, hindsight's always 2020, but thinking about all of those different components, I think you can get so caught up in all of the internal dynamics, right? Like you said, the team, the internal communications, what does this mean for our systems, all of that, to also be thinking of exactly what does this mean for the customers, especially it's not the kind of thing where you can do that market testing in advance because you can't tell anyone that this is coming. So I think the situation that you guys were in of having to like reprove yourselves and being in the situation, oh, the customers chose a competitor, now we need to bring them along. I mean, kudos to you for the success that you had in bringing that together at scale. I can only imagine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, to hit on the communication point, which is the second big lesson that you just touched on, it is external communication to the customers and why these two companies together make sense. And it's about framing all of that messaging in the context of the customer. Now, obviously, there are benefits to us. I mean, that's why we did the acquisition, but the customers don't care about that. They want to know, what does it mean for them? And so it's access to capabilities or value that maybe you wouldn't have had prior. It's, the ability for us to now grow faster or contribute more to product. It's our ability to sort of think about the best things of Savo and the best things of Seismic, and how do we bring these things together, and what does it mean for you, the customer? And so a lot of our, marketing or product marketing communications were really focused on that early on and making sure that that message was clear. It's getting out and being, this is 2019, 2018 or so. And so it's a lot of in-person, like hopping on planes, going to meet with all the top customers, spending time with them, building those relationships, assuring that, we establish the right level of credibility. And that's really from an external facing part. The internal facing communications are obviously just as important. And so why do we do the acquisition? Why does every employee at, ensuring every employee at Seismic knows and the acquired employees from Savo know that it's about accelerating our growth and moving up our timeline. It's about acquiring incredible customers and setting ourselves up for what we think are expansion opportunities to, again, provide more value to the customer and then capture that value in the form of ARR with us. It's also about acquiring a talented group of people who already know our space. It's getting those talented people to know what's our mission, what's our goals, align everybody to those goals, communicate the progress really transparently on how we're doing with getting customers to sort of move over from Savo to Seismic and winning those opportunities as well. It's the brand, it's the culture. And, some of those things when you do an acquisition become even more important because you don't want confusion, and I'm going to say this in a somewhat harsh way because I do think it's necessary if anyone's listening. When you acquire a company, it's really important that the culture and brand are established. And Savo was dead. Seismic is the go forward brand. And we had to very aggressively do that and make that clear. And not everybody's going to be on board with that. And that's also okay. We got to figure out who's not on board with that and then make a different set of decisions, and everyone will be happier and better off for it in the end.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen certainly in some cases, leadership team being a bit more wishy-washy. And I think it comes from a good place. It's from not wanting to insult or offend or alienate the people, products kind of coming in from the
Yeah.
acquiree. But it does force you to make some difficult decisions, put that stake in the ground. And I think that goes to your point of needing to, repeat the communications over and over because it takes time for people to internalize that.
It does. It really does. And it's hard. The human side of you wants to, or at least for me in particular, if anyone else out there is like me, I am by default and by nature, I'm a people pleaser. And so it's always great and easy to share news and tell people things that they want to hear. And when you have to tell people things they don't want to hear, it's a little bit harder. But I've learned that people are way more resilient than we might think. And people just want to be told the truth. And the faster and easier and the quicker you can get them the truth without a whole lot of sugarcoating. And that's not to say you don't say it in a kind and respectful way. We always lead with that, but just be honest. And I think people will, that resonates a lot with people and helps them to get on board behind, whatever the specific initiative is that you are trying to drive forward.
Yeah. I'm curious, are there any stories kind of on the people side that really stand out to you? Either someone that was a bit of a naysayer and then came around, or someone that like particularly rose to the occasion?
Yeah. So there were, I have a couple things that I think were important, and I have to give a lot of credit to the leadership team at Savo who all exited with the acquisition. But one thing that they did that I thought was really professional of them was that, we had decided, as often happens with acquisitions, that there was going to be some headcount reduction, and the prior leadership team came in and they did that riff before the acquisition and before it was finalized. And so it allowed us to sort of start on a slightly warmer foot because we weren't the ones that had just, you know, executed a big or, a layoff the day prior or whatever it happens to be. And so it did soften things a little bit. The other part of it was that you have to choose the right people to come in who lead with empathy, which I think is, if you were to ask my boss at the time why I was selected, that is one of my strengths to come in and do that. And then we also brought in a couple other folks from, call it the Seismic side, just for simplicity, into the Savo business to help sort of integrate processes and operations and culture and some of those things. But then on the Savo side, it really was about empowering middle management. And there were a number of core people there who had been in the business for a while, who were trusted, who were influential, and it was getting them to see the benefit for all of the employees and for the customers. And then having those people in a lot of ways become advocates. And, they can go out and they can advocate for why this is a good thing for Savo, why it's going to be better for the employees in the long run. And, one other little anecdote, I was talking to, again, Doug Winter, who was my CEO at the time. This is maybe about a year and a half ago. And we were sitting together having dinner, and he was telling me the story of they run these employee surveys at Seismic still to this day, and they cohort the results based on, how you came into the business, whether you were a direct hire or you came from one of the 3 or 4 acquisitions. And as you might expect, those that were hired originally into Seismic still were the number one in terms of employee engagement, the highest rated. But to this day, number 2 are people who came in from Savo. And I'm incredibly proud of that and all the work that we did to make sure that, again, we got the right people, we got them excited, we treated them really well, we paid them well. And, for those who weren't on board, we were very gentle and, they had hopefully as good of experience leaving the business as they did coming in, found their next opportunity, which is better suited for them and for us as well.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Such a great testament. Now, I have a question for you about the marketing side of things and thinking, when we work with clients through these kinds of transitions, we're often brought in really to help with the new messaging, positioning, the communication plan, the marketing plan. And we're often thinking about kind of that launch phase, kind of the building, establishing new foundations and kind of the moment that you bring it out to the market. And then kind of the ongoing is like the new normal, as we call it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, did it look like that in your organization, and how long were kind of those phases for you?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, there's always a bit of a testing the market to see what message or messaging is going to resonate the most, and then being willing to adapt and iterate on that messaging as quickly as possible. And so I'm a big believer in, hey, let's not overthink this message. Let's get it out there quickly. Let's see what resonates, what works. If it doesn't, let's try something else, or even sort of simultaneously A/B testing multiple messages with similar types of customers all at the same time and see which ones will give you the best, will yield the best results, whatever those results may happen to be. And that can come in the form of LinkedIn messaging or cold or, outbounding or website messaging or even what you put in the content in your slide decks, those sorts of things. We were really good at just getting it out there fast and being very responsive to what is working and what's not. I think we definitely learned early on, I think back early on, it was, and again, I'm talking about the Seismic days. We were sort of victims of the, hey, we're going to go in and we're going to tell you how great we are. And, there was, I'd say 5 or 6 years ago, this sort of very universal, concept that that's not a great idea. you should first start with the problem set and then talk about how your solution eventually solves that problem, or, what's the problem, how are you solving it today, and why would you make a different decision? So looking at that sort of trifecta of questions is really the way that I now start to anchor every discussion on messaging and product. And then it's about finding repeatability, right? Which feels blatantly obvious, but can you find customers that look the same, have a similar set of problems, train up your marketing teams and your sales teams to be able to tell that consistent story, to be able to handle a consistent, similar set of objections. And I think all those things just lend itself well to just a really efficient go to market from a resourcing perspective, and efficient from, a success in win rate perspective as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like a tremendous experience and transformation that you really helped lead. And I know you mentioned that was really, coming out of that experience is really your first time in that CEO role. I'm curious, what was the transition for you like in your current role, kind of the next time you're stepping into a CEO role, not for the first time?
Yeah, it was. I knew a lot more, and therefore it was a much more comfortable experience. Like, at no point in time do I remember feeling, lost or confused or unsure of what to do. And if those moments did come, I wish I can give credit to the person who said this or where I read it. I just don't fully remember. But I remember reading an article or listening to a podcast where it said, if you're a CEO or a founder of a business and you wake up one day and you're not sure what to do, the first thing you should do is just go talk to customers. And then you'll very quickly realize where the problems are, where you should focus your attention. And that is just a mantra that I continue to live by and continue to do. Um, I I will say, the hardest part about going from a general manager role where I was running this acquisition and I'd been in prior general manager roles to a CEO role was, it is more context switching than I ever would have imagined, because it's, you know, 9 a.m. you're on a call with the board, 10 a.m. you're on a customer call, 11 a.m. you're dealing with employee relations issue, noon you're dealing with, something else. And it's just this constant ability to flip your mind in an entirely different direction and still be able to focus in that meeting at that particular point in time when your, messages are blowing up, your emails are blowing up, your phone is probably ringing, and every hour it's something different. And it's a skill set to be able to do that. It's incredibly hard. But learning how to do that well is one of the things that I often am incredibly proud of.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I think back to something you said earlier about you being an introvert, and that resonated with me because I am also an introvert. And I think most people that meet me now don't realize that. But I think it's the combination of, right, that context switching. You're talking to people all day long. You could have one conversation that's super strategic, and then you're down in the weeds on something, trying to work through a solution. And by the end of the day, you're exhausted, but fulfilled, right?
Yes.
Um,
And at the end of the day, I curl up in a bed and, like recharge and get ready to do it all again the next day, but I genuinely enjoy my days, and I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy helping people and helping to solve problems. And, I spoke on a panel discussion last week, and one of the big things that I shared with the group is, running a business is really hard, but you have to find joys and you have to find pleasure in solving problems and doing hard things. And I remember a story one time where a guy on my team came to me and, he was trying to solve this hard problem. He was building a demo for a really sophisticated financial services customer. And he's talking to me. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't figure this out. I'm trying. And it's like, I hire really smart people. We hire really smart people to solve really hard problems. And so I believe in you. Like, you can go figure this out. And so go off and figure it out. And 2 hours later, he did. And it ended up being a really successful deal. And we closed the deal and we won. But things like that, you have to find joy in doing really difficult things.
Yeah. Which I think some of that is celebrating the wins, whether they're big wins or small wins, because that's the momentum that builds up. And it's the same as, in interpersonal life. If you have to kind of motivate to, let's say, go for a run, but then you
Yeah,
start running and then you feel good about it, the next time you can kind of carry that momentum with you and say, I know I'm going to enjoy this. I know I'm going to feel good after. Need to just get started.
absolutely agree. Couldn't agree more.
So, Craig, I'd love to ask you a bit more about your leadership style. Can you talk about, how do you describe your leadership style? What do you feel is unique about what you bring to your organizations?
Yeah, I think I tried to be as hands off as possible. And I think about the functional skills that I bring to an organization. I'm way more of a generalist versus having a deep functional level experience in sales or marketing or product or whatever it happens to be. And so I've done a really good job, and my style is generally to try to surround myself with really smart people who know more than me in each of those functional areas. And that I have enough experience that I can challenge and ask good questions and make sure we're approaching things holistically across the business in a really good way. Some example that comes to mind pretty immediately is in my current role as CEO at Voltron Data, and even in my prior role as CEO of Lumar, uh, both were very technical products and selling to technical audience. And so as someone who's not technical, it is difficult to feel confident participating in customer conversations when you don't have the depth of knowledge to contribute in the way that you may normally would want to contribute. It's difficult to make trade-off decisions on roadmap and how the product is architected or technical approach. And in each of those scenarios, it's really about surrounding myself with one or two people who I trust, who can help bridge the gap, who can help me understand decision A versus decision B, what the impact to the business, what's the impact to customers. And I love hiring great people and getting the heck out of their way, and people who know more than me, who are better equipped. And my role is to really manage the communication and manage the process and make sure that we challenge each other. The various leaders are talking to one another. And I think that is and leads to a really successful set of outcomes. The other thing that I think I do is, which, maybe is unique. I don't know for sure, but I challenge almost every single decision, probably annoyingly so for members of my team, even if I agree with it. And what I mean is I set the expectation with my teams that someone has to take the counter argument to this in every discussion. Let's make sure we're thinking about this incredibly holistically. And so if everyone in the room agrees with the decision, then I'm like, well, enough. Someone else, I don't care if you like this idea or you don't, someone take the counter argument. And if no one does, I will. And as part of that, it forces me to then spend a lot of time listening, less time speaking, try to just make sure that I offer my perspectives last. That's something that I try to do a really good job of, just to make sure that I don't bias anyone else's decision. And I hope that I wouldn't, but sometimes the subconscious, when your boss says, I want this, it can influence and impact you. And I don't want to do that. And so I just want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the power of the words the power of my words and how they impact other people in the organization as well. A lot of my leadership has just been shaped by, my past experiences. I've had some incredible managers who I've modeled my style after. I went to Kellogg for B school, and Kellogg stresses high impact, low ego kind of leadership. I'm all about reading books on leadership. I mean, it's a really important piece of who I am and the part that I enjoy the most.
Yeah, certainly share that with you. I was talking to another CEO the other day, and he was saying that his biggest learning over the years was listening, right? That
Yeah.
as any kind of leader, really, you get accustomed to sharing your opinion and being one of the first to speak and all of that. And I think that, I've had that experience too, where you're excited about something, you want to jump in and brainstorm with the team and be in it. But that concept of like bite your tongue, be okay with a little bit of silence. So I like what you're saying about kind of talking last as a way for making the rest of the team and the rest of the conversation more conducive to kind of new and different thinking.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I want to build on that point. That actually brings up something that's interesting for me is, in doing that, you also have to understand the various personalities of the people that you're in the room with. And some are perhaps more apt to just jump in with their thoughts versus others. And it could be an introvert versus extrovert thing, or it could just be, some people just take more time to think about their ideas and they want to make sure those ideas are well thought out. And so, one of my roles, I always feel like as the leader, is to read the room and understand when someone may be trying to get a word in, but there are more assertive personalities, perhaps, that are dominating the conversation. And as a leader, I do think it's my job to enable those who are maybe more quiet, or to support them to directly solicit their opinion or their thoughts on specific topics. And this works whether it's an in-person setting or in a remote setting. But it's, if you happen to be remote, or sorry, if you happen to be in person, then oftentimes they'll say, well, so and so, what do you think? Or if we're in a video conferencing platform, almost all of them will have a raised hand feature. And so it's, hey, let's use the raised hand feature to make sure everyone can get a word in. And I just think it's important to make sure you hear all of the voices in the room, and that data will help you to inform whatever the final decision is. If in a certain situation, I am the final decision maker, and I'm not always the final decision maker on things, but if I am, I want to make sure I hear and have access to all the data, or as much data as possible, before doing so.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point about listening to those dynamics. I'm a big fan of the round the horn updates when everyone's coming into
Yeah,
the meeting knowing you're going to go around the room, because oftentimes there are people who are not as inclined to speak when the whole team is together. And sometimes those are the biggest gold nuggets that you can get. I had a colleague a number of years ago, and it was like silent but deadly. Like whenever she said something, you
yeah,
had to really push her to say something. But when she did, you're like, wow, why are you not talking more? Right? You want to encourage
exactly
them.
right. Exactly right. I think the reason I focus on that, I look back now, and, even early in my career, I remember I was that person. And, I've had a number of managers throughout my career say to me, like, I just want you to speak more. And, in those moments, I remember thinking, but John or Sally or Sue or whoever's talking, I can never get a word in. Everyone's, and I don't want to compete for airspace. And so, sometimes it's let's create the space and make sure everyone has room to contribute.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. So Craig, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. You
Yeah.
already told me earlier you were not always sure you wanted to be a CEO, but who are you as a kid? How do you think your childhood and your life has shaped the career that you built for yourself?
Yeah. I grew up in a fairly large household. Uh, my mother's, one of her famous sayings, at least amongst our family, is she bore two children, but she raised eight. And so I've got a couple step siblings, and I got four cousins who also grew up in the house with us. My mom's a saint. She brought in a bunch of kids who who had needs that she could help fill, and so she's an incredible woman. And as a result, being the young, or actually the second youngest of that group, it's often hard to, you know, stand out and get a word in and all those sorts of things. And so, one of the spaces and places where, we grew up in a pretty religious household, and, I spent a lot of time, at church and speaking in front of the room and all these sorts of things, which actually, I think, as I look back, really helped to get me comfortable being in front of people, in front of a room, and ease the nerves and those sorts of things. And then just growing up, even through high school and college and some of those various experiences, I just over time just learned more, and I matured, and throughout with all of those things, I just kind of just developed a set of skills, and you know I try to hone those skills. I'm pretty humble as a person, and I in every conversation I have, I try to take something away or learn something. It doesn't matter who it is I'm talking to. I feel like there's something that I can learn. I try to incorporate and add it into my toolbox. And so, yeah, I just grew up in a big family with a whole lot of people. And, now I'm in a role where I'm managing a whole lot of people. And, there's a certain level of inclusivity that my mom showed growing up that shapes who I am, and why I'm an inclusive leader today. When you have so many people coming in from, in some cases, more distressed familial situations, there's a certain level of empathy you have to take if they now suddenly come into your household. And, as I think about my ability to be empathetic with employees and how they're feeling and see their point of view, I think a lot of that foundational grounding as a kid just shaped me to be who I am today.
Yeah. And I'm sure these days work keeps you pretty busy, but can you talk if there's anything I know you're working on at the moment, maybe outside of work that you'd want to share?
Yeah. So you mentioned, as part of my intro, I am deeply passionate. I serve on two boards today. Kids and animals are two of my biggest passion. So I'll shamelessly just talk a little bit about, Link Unlimited Scholars. And it's really about empowering and impacting, call it the life trajectory of, scholars, specifically gifted and talented kids in Chicago, many of which would not normally have exposure to various career paths. So there's a big focus on academic enrichment, college access, leadership development. We proudly tout graduation rates. College graduation rates of our scholars are at close to 60% for Black students specifically, versus the national average for Black students is way too low at 28%. And so for us to take the national average at 28 and have our students graduating at 60 is one of the proudest things in my career. The national average for all students, regardless of ethnicity, is closer to 48%. And so we're even above that average. And so I'm really proud of the impact we're having there. Linkunlimited.org is how you find us. And then I also serve on the board of the Humane League, and my other passion is animals. And so our mission is really focused on factory farming and ending cruelty or abuse of animals that are raised specifically for food. And so we're really, really laser focused on today, shorter term, reducing the impact on the cruelties of animals as they are produced for food. And so those two things take a bunch of my time. And then outside of that, I spend a lot of time with my family and my kids and those sorts of things. And, those are always going to be passions of mine and always going to be the number one priority. And last thing, yeah, I like to exercise and, keep myself motivated and staying in shape and those sort of things, and eating really clean and eating well. And, those things just, give me the fuel and the energy that I need to, sort of succeed in my personal and professional life.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I'm curious on the fitness and kind of keeping up your energy. Are there any like must-have habits that are your life hacks or your non-negotiable because they're good for you?
Yes. So I need to do some sort of exercise at least 3 times a week. I generally do it 4 or 5. But the non-negotiables, yoga at least once a week. I go for one long run at least once a week, and then I need at least one sort of in once a week. And it can vary, scale up and down depending on my time. But I think fitness is one of those things that it's a way to clear your mind and just make sure you're grounded and centered and focus on the things that really matter, especially when you're having stressful days. I think there are other avenues that you can turn to relieve stress. Unfortunately, some people will turn to alcohol or whatever those things are, and I'm try really hard not to do that. And I try to de-stress with exercise, and it's worked pretty well so far. Not to say I don't drink, but turning to exercise more often than not is a much healthier way to operate.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I think for me, like those kinds of things are the things that I do for myself, but also to set a good example kind of for my family. And as my kids
There you
get
go.
older, going biking with them, going running with them, I imagine for you, the nonprofits you're involved with as well, just to lead by example.
I completely agree with that. And that's the goal. And I think about I'm on the one education nonprofit, Link Unlimited. I also serve as a mentor. And so, I'm setting an example for my kids and also for, other youth here in Chicago as well. And I do take that role. Um, I don't take it lightly, I guess is the easiest way to say it. I think it's important to set a good example for those, in a little younger than us.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. Craig, I wanted to come back to one other topic related to your business because we're talking about leading through change and transformations. I wanted to hear a little bit about what are the transformations your clients are going through and how are you working with them through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just a little bit of context. So we are a large scale data processing company, and, think about data processing as the backbone of almost every business decision that's made. And so whether it's how do I define my pricing strategy or risk management or fraud detection, companies are just gathering data from all these various sources, whether it's transaction data, sensors, log data, everything you do on a device or a computer, it kicks off a log. Autonomous vehicles, a car, everything kicks off all these logs. And so the challenge is that as that data grows, um, the ability to sort of make sense of that data, process it, aggregate it, join it, do mathematical computations on it, it gets more and more expensive and sophisticated. All of this data is feeding into modern AI systems. And so what we do is we accelerate that data processing at scale. And so imagine, the idea that we can leverage, we do a lot of our work on GPUs. And so we can leverage this parallel processing, parallel task management that a GPU hardware provides over traditional CPUs. And we can do things, up to 100 times faster than existing technologies today. And so the idea and the concept of that is novel, is relatively new, and requires a lot of education in the market to drive this change. And so everyone today is all hot to trot on AI, ML, ML. All those things require a lot of data to fully optimize. And that is the role that we play at Voltron Data, is in the pre-processing, the preparing of that data to feed into those systems. Agents are all the rage nowadays. And so where and how do we feed AI agents enough data? That's the role we play in this ecosystem to make sure that we can, transform and process data really quickly for our customers.
Yeah. And so, given the market education that you were talking about, because this is all so new, what are the things that you found work best to help educate your market?
Got to find a use case. You got to find a use case that resonates, that's really important. And, we've been able to do that in a couple specific areas, financial services, federal, retail. But ultimately, you have to come out with a message that resonates most, and you got to get to the right person to communicate that message. And so, it's the playbook on how you do this, I don't think is anything that innovative or revolutionary, but the execution of it is actually incredibly hard. One, finding the right person, and then two, finding them at the right time, and then hitting them with a message that, that will resonate, that will make sense, is the big challenge that we're all faced with. And so, we're going through all the typical things that you would expect, whether it's, social campaigning, content marketing, and webinars, and we're showing up at all the right events and all those things that you would expect for us to do. We are doing those tactics, but we spend a lot of time on story, crafting the right narrative, and making sure the use cases are ones that people will see and hear and think, hey, I have that exact same problem as that exact bank over there. If it's solving it for them, it'll likely solve it for me as well.
Yeah. Which I think in cases like that, there's such a new opportunity for people within organizations to become champions of something like that, to kind of latch onto a message like that, as you say, have it resonate with them, and then bring it into their organization in a way that maybe they wouldn't have had the opportunity a few years ago.
Yeah. You have to find that person. And that's the hard part. You need someone who's a little bit innovative, who's willing to take a little bit of a risk, because if it's a newer technology or even a new technology to that enterprise, then, you don't want to be the one that brought in something new that ultimately didn't work. Right. And so you've got to find someone who sees the value of what you're bringing and is willing to step out a little bit and take a risk. And if your product solves real problems, that risk is obviously meaningfully mitigated. And, it's getting that person who's willing to do so. And sometimes if you're selling to large organizations like we do, that's a really complicated thing. There's politics and bureaucracy and all these different, processes that you have to get through to ultimately get a customer, and having a champion who can help you navigate those processes just becomes really critical.
Yeah. Yeah. So Craig, we only have a few minutes left. I'd love to ask you, you were talking about your leadership style and how much you love kind of investing in leadership. I'm curious, as you think back to your first ever leadership role, knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given your younger self?
Ooh, that is a really good question. I'm going to say always be self-aware. That is the one. Be more self-aware, and it's okay to not know something. Early on in my career, I remember just feeling worried that if I didn't have the answer, or if I didn't know how to do anything, then someone's going to think I'm not smart or I'm not fit to do whatever a particular role is. And I wish I could have told myself at the time, you're not expected to know anything. You're a 21-year-old kid who just graduated college. no one expects you to know everything, and, take advantage of the opportunity to ask every question you can. And when you ask those questions, learn and try not to ask it 3, 4, 5 times. I mean, ask it, learn it, and then internalize it and apply it. But know what you know what you don't know, and be confident in saying what you don't know and getting other people to help you do the things that you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I love that advice. And I think it's one of those cases where the younger we are, often the more we think we know. And then as we get older,
Yes.
we realize how much we don't know when we actually
Yeah,
know so much more.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I say it to my kids all the time who try to trick me into I'm like, I know all this. You guys can't fool me. I got this.
Yeah, we've been there. We know how your brain works. And we're
We do.
on to you, kids.
We do.
Well, thank you, Craig. This has been a really fantastic conversation.
Good. I've enjoyed it as well. I appreciate you having me. And thank you for making this so easy on me, and I'm sure all your other guests as well. It's a really easy conversation to have with you.
Yeah, yeah, it's a pleasure. And, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah. So I am pretty active on LinkedIn, and so Craig Dunham, Voltron Data. It's really easy to search and find me there. If, for some reason you think you have a problem that maybe Voltron Data can solve, I can be found at craig@voltrondata.com. So super easy to find me.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Craig. Well, this has been a really fantastic discussion. And to our listeners, if today's episode gave you any valuable insights, and I'm pretty sure that it did, please share this episode with someone. We know that spreading these kinds of experiences and knowledge helps all of us grow as leaders and helps us drive successful transformation in our organizations. So thanks again, Craig. And this has been another wonderful conversation on Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.